In the prologue finale, Thorfinn has been at his most irrelevant. His character arc has gone nowhere, and he has been forcefully ejected from the main ongoing plotlines. Only in the very end is he violently pulled back in to experience the most important event for his character so far. Despite how stubborn he's been, you know this will change things. And then we timeskip, 1.5 years, and he acts completely different. Now, I love this timeskip, but it and this new Thorfinn are sometimes the target of certain criticisms, and some of those are built on assumptions about Thorfinn. That's why I want to talk about this transition period. And then, building upon that, I want to unpack or sort out my thoughts about Thorfinn's motivations, at which point I will talk about stuff beyond the second arc too. I will warn you when it's time. It's gonna be a smaller video, no grand discussion about big ideas and such, just clearing some stuff up, and those might or might not be useful in interpreting Thorfinn or some story intentions down the line. So first of all, timeskip. Why timeskip? As a writer who doesn't create the story as you go, and you have A, B, C things to say with your story, you want to be staying on point. You want to be concise and dense, stay in the meaty parts, the substance. You don't want fluff and a watered down story. You could just spend time with Thorfinn right after prologue, which would be only about him, and then do the same farmland stuff but with some of the Thorfinn content extracted out of it. But that is just a longer story, not a juicier one. By having the timeskip there, you have the Thorfinn stuff, which the reader is already familiar and invested in. You draw them in with that by getting them a bit confused and questioning what happened after the climax, why is he like that now? Confusion is not bad, people. The reader is actively engaging with the story in this instance. And at the same time, there is the new farmland stuff being set up. You delay dealing with Thorfinn until farmland starts, so you can do multiple stuff simultaneously, and not have the story be a slog. You can trust the reader, let them juggle multiple things in their head. That's fun, that is engaging. Don't go, here's thing A, alright, do you get it? Fully understood? Okay, let's move on. Thing B, go off a bit, hit the gas. In media res is great. Well, this technically isn't it, but it is in spirit. And I don't believe you when you say you're allergic to it, because you sure ate that up when Askeladd had that backstory. What, should we have the story go chronologically and start with that? No, don't trust that reader. Of course, that doesn't tend to be the crux of the matter. The criticism tends to go like, Thorfinn would obviously go the direction of his father, that is telegraphed and I'm totally okay with it, but we skipped the journey there. He's suddenly, after a single scene, completely non-violent and passive. It's rust. Change happens slowly, gradually, linearly from one point to another. And I think I get the disconnect here. Who is this Thorfinn? Because, to me, this is basically just one step away from this Thorfinn. Fundamentally, it's that person. Because why is he so different? He acts differently, he doesn't lash out, he isn't angry. So? I bet you can get angry in certain situations. Certain things make you tick, others make you happy and serene. Depends on the situation. Does that mean you are a different person? Don't be dense, you say. That's not a permanent change in personality. Well, what if the situation, your environment, has permanently changed? Okay, I'll stop playing around. Imagine you are a prideful person, and that pride is based on specific values and beliefs and way of thinking that you've molded your identity around. And then the most humiliating thing possible happens directly centered around that identity. Something you can never go back from and is impossible to deny. Your identity is invalidated. You could never again show your face around like you are all that. Your personality, or at least the way you act, would change instantly. Permanently. Delusion is an option for sure, but if you think it's the only one, you've been watching too many drama commentary videos. Now, would that mean you are a different person? I don't really care to argue which aspects of yourself are really you here, but just pointing out that some things still would not have changed. The aforementioned values and beliefs and way of thinking are still there, unchanged at the core of your being. They're the reason you feel embarrassment and despair, as much as they were the reason you felt prideful before. When you were prideful, you might have lashed out in anger when insulted or pushed to change, but now you might accept or even agree with those. Your environment or a certain event simply shifted your self-perception of where your identity stands relative to your values. Boom, instant attitude change. I don't think the story is rushing. I think people are rushing to assumptions. when they see this passive Thorfinn and assign to him more peaceful values or potentially guilt for his victims because they anticipate the story to turn him into Thors. Because yes, Thorfinn, here, still doesn't feel guilt for the people he killed. He potentially feels guilt for not living up to that warrior image in his head by avenging his father. See his interactions with Einar. When Einar talks about war and warriors, we focus on Thorfinn, but there's no specific emotion there. You can't say this is a clear sign of guilt. When they talk and Thorfinn asks if Einar hates him, he doesn't look sad or anything. This is his reality, this just makes sense to him. What he clearly doesn't expect is for Einar to treat him well. That's not familiar to him in the life he's lived. That juxtaposition is the point of these scenes. Just because for once Thorfinn is calm and collected, doesn't mean he's displaying any sort of new wisdom. Now the dream is of relevance here, because it first appears before this, the same morning actually, and the dream also is related with his guilt. But at the same time, logically, it's not the exact same dream. When we get to see it, it clearly has incorporated some ideas he reflected upon later, and he already has enough in his mind to cause nightmares. Still, if Einar is the reason Thorfinn becomes more empathetic and realizes the horrible things he did to people, the night right before is when that starts, when Einar first opens up. Anyway, talking about dreams at this point of the arc is very murky territory, you can't get anything concrete out of it. I'm gonna say that Farmland doesn't do much to tell you the ways this is the same Thorfinn. It mainly focuses on what's changed as a result of the final prologue scene. And I think that's because from an authorial perspective, you're more blind to potential assumptions of people that don't have this all sorted out in their heads. It's like, why would you think this? I didn't give you reason to yet. You're rarely gonna hear such praise from me for the anime, especially for the filler segments, but I know a scene is good when I constantly want to reference it when talking about a particular subject. In episode 4 of season 2 they added a pretty nifty dream sequence. The different Einar stuff, you can take it or leave it, and the changes take away some other Thorfinn elements, but they really made clear what is going on with Thorfinn in a way that made the story better while still keeping some subtlety. Even before that scene, the strong kill the weak, it is only natural. Nice addition. That's still what Thorfinn believes and accepts. In the dream, Thorfinn doesn't see the people he killed as people. He sees them as shadowy monsters, threats, enemies. He does not feel bad for them. At the end of the sequence, that's still the case. But he also sees himself as one of them, a shadow. He has accepted he's not different. This is a result of Einar's prodding, but also his now crushed pride. Previously, such an idea would be angrily rejected by an arrogant Thorfinn who thinks he's better than everyone around him. Prologue Thorfinn is emboldened by his beliefs. Now, in his current position, they put him down, so he can let himself examine them. To clear up any confusion about the involvement of the English woman, the shadowy figures are portrayed as they are because they were all warriors that fought and tried to kill Thorfinn. These are the people Thorfinn killed, because he was a powerful mercenary that was utilized to take out key targets, warriors, people that would put up a fight. And he asked a big reward for his services, the duel. He would not be tasked to kill or round up women and children. Yes, he is still responsible for their deaths, he helped Askeladd's band after all, but indirectly, allowing Thorfinn to not confront that reality. Thorfinn just didn't think about that stuff. Not convenient to him, I guess. Except when it comes to that incident with the English woman who he had a connection with, and his involvement makes clear even to him that her death was on him. That's why she is special and appears in the dream unshadowed, in a way that shows that, specifically for her, Thorfinn does feel guilt. He had that ideological barrier, the might makes right, so he doesn't feel bad morally, but the guilt will still come through when he personally cares for her. Alright, back on track. You gotta realize, even after that, in the months before the dream, Thorfinn's main internal struggle is about him being empty and purposeless. He still never moralizes his change. Einar does. Thorfinn at most is being fair and unbiased about who he is. Although things do happen subconsciously, his new life and friends do push him to a specific direction, and at the end of the day he does come to some different conclusions than Prologue Thorfinn. Look at his outburst of anger at the farmhands. Despite what he said just before, he clearly blames them. This anger shows that he has now taken a moral stance, finally. He doesn't accept what he once did, the might makes right mentality that still existed in the beginning of Farmland. See, it's kinda ironic. The lethargic Thorfinn is closer to Prologue Thorfinn, but the violent incident here is indicative of someone closer to the pacifist Thorfinn. By adopting that moral stance, he accepts the people he killed as his victims, as people he should empathize with. This is where he starts feeling guilt about that. It is after the dream that Thorfinn confesses his crimes to Einar, even though Einar knows, but it's the first time Thorfinn acknowledges how awful his deeds were. That's why he still has to say that to Einar. That's basically what I wanted to communicate. Thorfinn's farmland development is more gradual than people realize. The initial shift in attitude can be mistaken for more than it actually is. I understand the intuition that a change in a person should be slow and one-directional, but when you look closer and actually sort through the logic of this stuff, people change in more erratic ways. Thorfinn overcorrects straight for the extreme pacifism before being reined in a bit. That helps the series explore its ideas more thoroughly, but it also makes sense for the character. This may not hit for every person the same, but have you ever had over the span of maybe some months reflected on ways you have acted, seen them as deeply embarrassing, and therefore molded your identity in opposition to those, trying to distance yourself as far as possible from the source of your past shame or guilt, maybe making you an individual hypersensitive to those qualities and easily recognizing them in others? Or another example, have you ever seen someone you know in person or in the internet grow very quickly disillusioned and do a hard pivot politically to the other side before maybe centering themselves more? Some of the most anti-religion people I've seen used to be religious. I think you get it. Generally, I think most change in people is hindered because of pride. It's hard to admit you're wrong, to see yourself as wrong. Denial is reflexive then. So that's what makes Thorfinn's change so convincing. His pride is targeted and eliminated first. It's one of those character development arcs where, I feel it. It doesn't just make logical sense, it's viscerally understandable to me. That's pretty much where this video was gonna end initially, but during writing Two Paradises, I short-circuited myself reading a sentence I wrote about Thorfinn deciding to establish a village in Vinland. Something that marries the path of atonement he needs to walk and his want for purpose, helping himself by helping others. Whenever I look at this sentence, I get mind-crushed. Is this just me writing words here? Or, I honestly don't remember exactly. I assume it makes sense since I left it in the video, and I did think about it and sort it out. But I don't remember exactly how I got here. The thought process is his need for purpose and path for atonement not the same thing already? Or like the latter is the result of the former, or no? Wait, now the sentence makes sense again. I can't remember what my problem was. Well, never mind the structure I had in mind, we're brute forcing this. What are Thorfinn's base motivations? Specifically, how do they interact with each other? And are they in fact different things or not? Okay, so we have Thorfinn complaining about being an empty man and that he has no purpose, which leads to talks about rebirth. I want to be a kinder person. You know the panel. I don't even consider this to be a spoiler for the third arc because it doesn't say or show anything new about Thorfinn. His purpose is to better himself, his journey to help others. So, Thorfinn's one central motivation is in a way the greater good, to be a good person, to do good deeds, like his father wanted him to. Like Einar, who helped him and made his life better for no other reason than it was the right thing to do. Every other motivation stems from that one. Or, let's look deeper into this. Thorfinn, after developing a conscience, clearly suffered heavily from his developing guilt, and survivor's guilt also specifically. His life from that point on became dedicated to atonement, and a certain question lingers in him. What does he deserve? Snake makes a very clear, very strong case. Atonement through death. Young Thorfinn would also agree with that approach, revenge and all. But Thorfinn fundamentally desires to live, even though he doesn't fully understand why, so he tries to make a case for himself. Such a harsh punishment is too awful, when a person can change and can go on to do great deeds for the sake of atonement. It's a thematically super relevant statement about violence in punishment and justice, and ultimately, guilt is Thorfinn's one central motivation that all the others came from. Thorfinn wants to do good deeds because of his guilt, and seeks a purpose in order to justify his existence. See how that tracks with early farmland Thorfinn too? He feels guilty as well, just for other reasons. That's why he is in this state. He hangs on to a want for purpose, cause without that, his guilt would just lead him to death, one way or another, and it almost did. But let's go back again, cause the need for purpose itself makes a good case for being at least the driving force for Thorfinn's actions. We're dismissing purpose too quickly as just an excuse to continue living when purpose is something people live for. On the hillside drear the fir tree dies, all bootless its needles and bark. It is like a man whom no one loves. Why should his life be long? Something to live for, especially since Thorfinn at this point in his life doesn't value himself and has no people in his life. Purpose has always been a sleeper theme in Vinland because it doesn't directly interact with the main theme, violence. But it is very often hidden in the motives of many characters. People want their actions to matter, contributing to something greater than oneself being portrayed in Vinland Saga as one of the ultimate forms of fulfillment and drive. Look out for it in the third and fourth arc, and you'll see how prevalent it is. And it's fascinatingly the one theme that often escapes the moral lens the series examines everything with. Thorfinn laments being empty not because of any moral failing or guilt. Even though at this point he understands his rage was unwise or hypocritical, he still suffers from its absence. I'll hold off on going into other examples later in the series for when I actually make a video about those arcs. But as for Thorfinn, in a way you could even see how his surfacing guilt and nightmares save him. They're unpleasant, but they're something. They give him direction again, his next war to fight, for the sake of feeling alive again. Fun perspectives, huh? Interesting to see the story like that. But I can't have that. I'm not against some open-endedness and room for interpretation, but not on the main character mid-story. Cause Vinland Saga is a rather complex cross-set of themes, and Thorfinn isn't the center of it. You can gain some interesting stuff from these interpretations, but I assure you the butterfly effect of the uncertainty about fundamental aspects of Thorfinn can ruin so much more. So I need to sort this out. Thankfully, the story has no holes for me to fix here, as I might have initially feared, cause I can't fix such a thing. The whole goddamn idea of this is the story gives me information and I get interested in that and I am led to specific questions and then eventually I get some answers. If I don't get the info properly, I don't form the questions correctly and I have no clue when or what I'm answered for, or I'm uncertain about it. This is a convo for me. It's interactive, or at least done the right way it should feel like it. I know some people see every story as like raw ingredients they get to pick and choose and use in any way they like, but for me this looks like someone's talking to you and you get stuck on something they say. You interrupt them, go on a tangent about it, project all of that onto them and start arguing or agreeing with them like they said any of that. You're shadowboxing with like 30% of a stated opinion, because you weren't listening to them. Rude. Anyway, certain reads are also unflattering, let's say, to Thorfinn, and they can be used to attack him much later in the story. Specifically that his guilt is the main motivation and the reason he goes to Vinland. Or that he's a fanatical person, he just needs a cause to follow blindly and stubbornly to feel like his life has meaning. Let's set things straight. We have three core motivations: guilt, the need for purpose, and his want to be a good person. The second and third are the easiest to separate, as the purpose theme is not as moralized. Thorfinn doesn't just long for something to live for in order to be a good person, and neither does that thing have to be something that betters the world or whatever in order to satisfy that desire. The reason they merge into one goal is that the series argues that the pursuit of a better world for everyone is an ideal feeling for our innate itch for substance and meaning. Some examples, and I'll get into proper spoilers here. Garm has no meaning or purpose in his life, and as a result, like early farmland Thorfinn, he doesn't value life much. In fact, he doesn't seem to believe in any meaning in anyone's lives. So there's no taboo in war. For him, it's an ideal use of life without meaning, efficiently extracting emotion and excitement out of it. Valuing life and finding substance in it go hand in hand. Vargar and his men just continued living as Vikings after the disbanding of the Jomsvikings. But without any purpose, they just accepted they'd die like this, and when Canute captured them, they were ready for it. Thorfinn recruiting them for the Vinland project saved them, not just because Canute was going to execute them. And they agree because they see logically there's some meaningful consequence in them following him. Might as well help others if you don't value your own life. Ivar wants to be someone great, a leader, a warrior. Because he's a Norseman, that's the two things he thinks about as great. But he does have to interpret reason for them being great. He has to rationalize them. So he sees them as being of service to something greater than himself, like a community. He wants to fight not for fun like Garm, but for a legitimate reason. Ivar's core desire isn't to help other people, and neither is it to be perceived as such. It is to be a man of substance and consequence, to live with drive. And for him, it logically follows that to be that, he has to contribute to something important, and that important thing will be service to others. Despite this, what he mainly cares about is not other people, but fighting for other people. It is the process, not the result. So a desire for purpose is self-serving, but it naturally aligns with altruistic endeavors. The guilt is a big deal here. It has always dictated Thorfinn's life. Even in Prologue, you could argue Thorfinn felt guilty for being weak and the liability that led to Thor's death. It informs his might makes right mentality. He constantly projects and pushes it onto others. Now in Farmland, his guilt very clearly leads him to his path of atonement and ultimately to Vinland. A man may have some moral stances, an understanding of what is right or wrong, but that doesn't necessarily make him dedicate his life to altruism. Heavy guilt though? That can strong-arm a person into it. Does Thorfinn go to Vinland for atonement's sake alone, and not actually for a personal desire to make the world better? Very damning interpretation. He constantly talks about atonement, and even the first time he got the idea of building a village in Vinland, he talks about it as a means to that. It is a damning view of Thorfinn because his guilt is a toxic motivation, except maybe making him a bit more humble. Thorfinn, truly dedicated to a land of peace, a salvation for the living, shouldn't do the bidding of the dead, because if their interests ever conflict, things get ugly. Maybe something the series doesn't leverage as much as it should have. I think Arnheide's death drives this home for Thorfinn though. No atonement, no dead zombies anywhere. This is not for them, or his father. It is for people like Arnheid and Einar, or him, just a result of empathy. And it is the big sin. It's framed as more important than the previous one. The dead, his guilt, don't really care. They want him dead. They try to drag him down, especially when one of them is alive and hunting Thorfinn. His only real atonement is death. That's what his guilt screams at him. And Thorfinn doesn't always have the strength to talk back to that. It is implied that Thorfinn gave up for a moment in The Hunter and the Hunted. Einar points that out. It's not fair. It doesn't help anyone. Einar doesn't even try to make an argument for the value of Thorfinn's life innately. Thorfinn has promised to go to Vinland for the sake of others. It is unfair to them. And Thorfinn ultimately moves on for them. Not to assuage his guilt, not because it's some purpose that he can latch onto to justify and spice up his life either. He doesn't have such a desire to live. Death for him has an aspect of relief in it, like Arnheid. This is the reason he goes on. The feeling of guilt is a fickle thing. It masquerades as a force for good, but really, it's not your conscience, just the pain your conscience administers to you. And like any pain, it makes you avoid it, through any means, righteous or selfish. So, there you have it. Guilt, want for purpose, the greater good. All three motivations exist and are distinct within Thorfinn, even if what they push him towards often aligns. I think it can be important to understand Thorfinn as a three-dimensional character and so interpret him as one later on. And I think as the series goes by, kind of the point is to make a purer Thorfinn. Not a less human Thorfinn, just one that escapes his inner demons and kinda purges himself of his more toxic aspects in a way that any average person can. One of the last chapters that came out as I'm writing this shows a big step forward to that too. It's kind of interesting that Thorfinn, as a character with less and less inner conflict and struggles as the story goes on, who is known for that appeal, the inner struggle, gets less interesting from that perspective. Because we deal with all that stuff that is set up, and when it's all gone, like, of course, that's gonna be the case. But also in a very realistic way, the last aspects of his former self just fizzle out. You gotta be kinda locked in to see it. Where in Farmland, it's more of an intense, in-your-face conflict. Not that I'm bothered with that, because Thorfinn has more functions in the story, and the story is much bigger than him. And you also want to see the result of that struggle for a while to be satisfied. And at the end of the day, all those experiences have not evaporated out of the character. They inform his actions, they get made into wisdom. He becomes a different type of character, with a new role in the story. Anyway, next script. I have to talk about the third arc. Don't know how long that'll be, or if it will be multiple videos, because I thought this would be an 8-minute ordeal, so who knows. The third arc stuff, I've been writing a script for it in my head forever since I started the channel, and I already have like 4 different preambles for it. Could be like 10 minutes until I actually talk about the events. It's fine though, I love preambles. See you again, hopefully soon.